We have breaking news now. President Biden and Ukraine's President Zelenskyy are about to hold a bilateral meeting. The two world leaders are in Lithuania for the NATO summit. Here's President Biden ahead of that meeting.
Come to the aid and assistance of Ukraine. He increased his military budget. He stepped up Japan, because he understood that when any part of the world has 185,000 people, soldiers, crossing a border, stealing sovereignty from another nation, that it affects the whole world. I want to thank you again publicly. We just concluded the first meeting of the NATO-Ukraine Council, and all our allies agreed Ukraine's future lies in NATO. That's not a surprise to any of us, I don't think. I hope it's not a surprise to you, Mr. President. Allies all agreed to lift the requirements for membership action plan for Ukraine and to create a path to NATO membership while Ukraine continues to make progress on necessary reforms. But we're not waiting for that process to be finished to make the long-term commitments that we're making to Ukraine's security. Vladimir and I shouldn't be so familiar. Mr. Zelenskyy and I talked about the kind of guarantees we could make in the meantime when I was in Ukraine and when we met in other places. And so today, the long-term commitments we're making are backed up by the notion that in the meantime, we're going to provide security to Ukraine for its needs and against any aggression that may occur. Today, the members of the G7 are launching a joint declaration of support for Ukraine to make it clear that our support will last long into the future. This starts a process by which each of our nations and any other nation who wishes to participate will negotiate long-term bilateral security commitments with and to Ukraine. We're going to help Ukraine build a strong, capable defense across land, air, and sea, and from which will be a force of stability in the region and deter against any and all threats. I want to thank my fellow G7 leaders and President Zelenskyy for their work to make this happen. I think it's a powerful statement of our commitment to Ukraine as it defends its freedom today and as it rebuilds the future. And we're going to be there as long as that takes. And again, I thank all my colleagues for their support for this.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, President Biden, Prime Minister Kishida, Chancellor, see you, Chancellor Scholz, Prime Minister Sunak, President Macron, Prime Minister Trudeau, Prime Minister Meloni, President Michel, President von der Leyen. Great honor to be here. The outcome of the NATO summit in Vilnius is very much needed and meaningful success for Ukraine. And I'm grateful to all leaders in NATO countries for very practical and unprecedented support, considering decades of our relations support for Ukraine. Today, there are security guarantees for Ukraine on the way to NATO, an important package of security guarantees. Today, we are coordinating with the G7 countries the framework for security guarantees that shall be further extended through arrangements with our key partners, bilateral and multilateral agreements. And Ukrainian delegation is bringing home significant security victory for the Ukraine, for our country, for our people, for our children. It opens for us absolutely new security opportunities, and I thank everyone who made it possible. Thank you, dear colleagues. Thanks you, thanks Lithuania and Jens Stoltenberg. Thank you very much. Slava Ukraini.
This concludes the speaking program. Please remain seated for the family photo.
He's listening there to President Biden and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy just ahead of a bilateral meeting between the two. The president talking about what's happening so far at the NATO summit in Lithuania, saying members there have agreed to create a path to NATO membership for Ukraine, but in the meantime, still renewing their commitment to Ukraine's security. And you heard President Zelenskyy there thanking all of NATO members for that. For more, let's bring in Inez de la Quatara at the NATO summit in Lithuania. Inez, it's an interesting nuance right now to say, you know, Ukraine cannot be a member yet, but now they're going to have a path to get there eventually.
Hey, Diane, good morning. Yeah, an interesting dynamic there between the two leaders. We saw President Zelenskyy there striking a more conciliatory tone. He thanked the NATO allies for their support. He talked about security guarantees that Ukraine was getting at the summit. He said he's bringing home significant security victories, and he's grateful to all NATO leaders for their practical and unprecedented support for Ukraine. We also heard from President Biden. He talked about how Ukraine's place is to eventually be in NATO, though that may not be now may not be the time for it. And he did talk about that G7 joint announcement that was coming to provide additional support for Ukraine.
Today, Zelenskyy said that he understands some people being afraid to talk about Ukraine's membership in NATO because, in his words, nobody is willing to have a world war. What are the risks involved here for NATO members?
Yeah, so this all has to do with Article 5, right? NATO's Article 5 that says that an attack on one member is an attack on all of them. And so that would draw, should Ukraine join NATO now, it would draw all NATO members into this war with Russia and would essentially set off World War III. And, of course, NATO allies in the West have really strongly tried to avoid that. So that's the crux of it, and that is the hesitation there with Ukraine joining NATO.
All right, Inez de la Quatara at the NATO summit. Thanks, Inez. We'll be checking in with you throughout the summit.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.